Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today it is time for a review of the 2018 biography by Alan Walker, Fryderyk Chopin, A Life and Times. Alan Walker, British-born musicologist who has spent a lot of time kind of back and forth between England and Canada. I think has spent a lot of his later years in Canada. Again, music professor kind of by trade. Really, his focus and expertise seems to be in this kind of early romantic period. And it's interesting to kind of contrast the different subjects that he writes about because he has a biography of Robert Schumann, which I have not read, but I understand that to be one of the more definitive works on Schumann out there. We obviously have this biography on Chopin, which is a relatively recent work. The man was, in his late 80s when he wrote this, which is pretty remarkable. And then his work on Franz Liszt, which is probably his greatest achievement in a lot of people's eyes. He wrote a three-part biography on Liszt, which I do own and will be reviewed on this channel at some point in the future. And it's generally considered, I think, one of the biggest marvels in the history of music biography. And it's interesting to kind of hear him talk about these three composers who really sit in that same lane of writing a lot of very piano-centric music. But we'll kind of get to the differences between them in a second. Fryderyk Chopin, who I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. I think if we were talking about this early era of romantic composers and what names and what songs people are going to be familiar with, Chopin really jumps to the top in large part because I feel like when you, to use a cliche, if you were to go on Spotify and look up lo-fi, easy listening classical music, which a lot of people do, that's a lot of people's primary exposure to classical music is through these very sedate playlists that they use for study in college. Chopin is going to be one of the names that pops up along with people like Satie and Debussy, and people like of that nature. Polish composer, moved to France at the age of 20 and established himself there, would settle there for the rest of his life, and became known primarily for his composing. Chopin was interesting in that he did not do a lot of prominent live performances. He preferred more kind of intimate settings, and that tracks when you listen to his music. And really, I think that is the key musical point that Alan Walker wants to make. I think when you listen to Chopin's work and compare it to the piano works of, say, Schubert or Schumann from the period, even Beethoven, there's really a stark difference between the character of Chopin's work and everybody else's. And there's so many kind of aspects of kind of Chopin's own personality that Walker kind of explains kind of comes through. Chopin is someone who was very opinionated, but there was always a sense of fragility with him, so much of that being because of his very lengthy battle with tuberculosis, which would eventually take his life at a very young age. And kind of interwoven there is this interesting connection between that and his music, his Polish heritage, and how it pops up in his music. And it gives it this unique character that even at the time people were commenting on. And it is very fascinating to bring it back to Franz Liszt, Alan Walker's other major interest, and seeing just how much Liszt and Chopin kind of contrast each other. For anyone who's not aware, Franz Liszt was not only a prominent composer, but also the most well-known virtuoso pianist of his time. And perhaps in some ways, maybe the most influential pianist who has ever lived because of how he, along with other kind of prominent virtuosos like Paganini on the violin, really presented this idea of the performer and personified that idea. And for the first time really made it so that the instrumentalist was who was kind of at the forefront of attention, of acclaim, and his style was so unique that it created a lot of waves and a lot of controversy. Very aggressive, very loud, very frenetic. A lot of people said that his interpretations of pieces, he would like murder them because of how aggressively and how loosely he would play these different kind of canonical works. And you contrast that energy to that of Chopin, who is very reserved, very morose, and plays pieces with a sort of elegance to the point where sometimes if you put him in the wrong setting, like, and he would perform them, like you literally could not hear him play. It's very interesting, and Walker makes a point of bouncing the two of these things back and forth kind of throughout the duration. This is a cultural biography, which we've kind of reviewed a few of those already. It means that, you know, we're putting Chopin in the context of his era, specifically of the kind of political context. Europe, again, as we kind of talked about in some of these other reviews, Europe in the early 19th century was a very tumultuous place, a lot of revolt and revolution and uprisings and that sort of thing happening. Chopin left Poland just before the uprising that happened there in 1830. And it's interesting to kind of hear Chopin's own life story and his sort of migrations as from place to place and how his travels took him there and how they intersect with the world that was happening at that point. It's a very bigger picture type of outlook. And when you consider kind of how macro that analysis is, it's very interesting that Walker makes it so accessible. This is a slam dunk of a biography because of how much is being said throughout the entire length, and yet how much it works in what it is. There's plenty of musical analysis in here as well. I think that it is very adeptly done. Again, doesn't really take up too much space, but you do get explanations of these were the pieces he was writing in this period. This is what is significant about them, which I think is the perfect level of analysis for a biography trying to grapple with as much as this one is. I also think it is very interesting to hear Walker talk about Chopin's relationship with the writer George Sand. That was her pen name. And how much of a bad historian Sand seems to be, even though like her narrative and her story surrounding Chopin, I think very much remained the dominant narrative for a long time because she penned her own kind of memoirs, her own recollections of her relationship with Chopin years after he died. And to hear Walker kind of not attack these ideas, but combat them and challenge them in a way that you would see out of like an academic biography, to me is very interesting. And again, kind of surprising how he's able to accomplish that while still keeping this book pretty accessible. It is a bit on the longer side. It's close to 700 pages, I think, but it reads pretty quickly, especially, first being someone who, again, was like chronically ill and did not live very long, dying before the age of 40. There are a lot of different things to unpack, a lot of different relationships that Chopin had. If I had one negative thing to point out is that it occasionally does get a little bit lost in the weeds of cultural context, of giving historical background to certain things, and you do go sometimes for somewhat extended periods of time without really interacting with Chopin himself. Your mileage may vary. I don't mind that personally, for the most part, but some people might think it a little bit extraneous and not really enjoy that. Think it doesn't really augment the story too much. But for the most part, I think this is a winner. As I said, I have not read Walker's biographies on Franz Liszt, so I'm very excited to read those. And for this being given his age, is probably most likely going to be his last major literary work. I think all the credit to Alan Walker for putting this together, and putting together a really sharp and coherent and extensive biography that probably, given its success and its popularity among a lot of people, is going to be probably the gold standard of Chopin's biographies for a long time to come. So very much would highly recommend this one. With that, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more reviews are to come. Hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks so much, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.